Hey, I thought I'd do a quick video on wildland fire given the LA fires that are raging. I put a video out a few nights ago about fire hardening your bug out location using NFP 1144, but I wanted to go through some of the details with some pictures that you can understand it. So this is a website I put together a few years ago just to explain wildland fires in general. If you take a look at this image, this is an example of what a wildland fire in extreme conditions looks like. And all these firebrands, these embers blowing everywhere. You might have a billion of these firebrands, and you might live in a fairly fire-hardened community, but sooner or later, one out of those billion firebrands, they're going to land in a bed that's ripe for ignition. So that's the kind of thing you're up against. What ends up happening in a wildland fire is you end up with a wildland fire that encroaches on growth, on the wildland-urban interface. It lights a structure, that kind of thing. Once you have a structure going, your fire department's going to respond to that structure. But in the midst of those firebrands, what's going to happen is you're going to have that shotgun effect of a billion little firebrands, and they're going to hit additional targets. So your municipality might have, for a subdivision, might have a couple thousand gallons per minute of water available for both potable water as well as firefighting. But you have one house you're dealing with, sucks a lot of water out, and then your second and your third and your fourth. And pretty soon, there's no more water and no more firefighters to fight fires. So there's this descending chaos that happens from a standard wildland fire to a wildland-urban interface fire to an urban conflagration to a genuine disaster scenario. Now here's kind of an interesting graphic. I like this. What you had was the fire approaching from the southwest, and as you can see, it takes out these initial structures. But take a look at these structures way over here. Those are caused by flying embers, well ahead of the fire line. You may end up putting out some fires initially, but you're going to have all these spot fires that you're going to go and deal with. And the question is, why were these particular locations targeted and the other homes made it unscathed? It has a lot to do with being prepared and a lot of luck. The reality is it's luck, but you can put luck in your favor. So here's an example of what's meant by wildland-urban interface. You have wildland-urban interface, which is one or more buildings per 40 acres. Intermix is defined as less than a building per 40 acres. You have an urban area that's fairly dense in terms of its housing, and then you have what's considered rural. My location, where I am at for my bug out location, it's certainly rural. If a fire happened, I'm not going to have a conflagration, but I'm going to take out my building. Regardless of the density of the structures around you, fire hardening a facility, it's going to strengthen the survivability of a structure. Here's two images. The one on the left, it's a standard subdivision. You can see the park here. Take a look at the image on the right. This is the aftermath of an urban conflagration. This conflagration was initiated by a wildland fire, and it decimated every single building within the subdivision. That's an unsurmountable problem to tackle. You cannot extinguish multiple homes simultaneously on fire. That's exactly what's happened in LA. That's what happened in Lahaina. There's several historical fires that follow this pattern. So there's a few things you can be aware of: weather, topography, and fuel. A lot of people don't think about topography, but if you look at the LA area where these fires hit, there's a lot of ravines, rolling hills, that kind of thing. What happens when you're dealing with a fire on a slope is the fire, I think we've all personally experienced this, as the fire is blowing, it's going to preheat the combustibles. And the very nature of the preheating causes early ignition. So that's the principle. The velocity of your wind pushing that flame front forward causes more rapid combustion. So if you have a building perched on top of a hill, it's going to be particularly prone to dealing with wildland fires. So here's a graphic just to demonstrate this principle. The fires, what they do is the velocity of the wind, almost through a Venturi effect, is actually going to crest at a high velocity. So if you're situated on a hill, you really need to be prepared for a worst case situation. I mentioned before there's 3 different classifications of permissible roofing structures. You see, back in the days, individuals, in fact, my childhood home in Oregon, we used cedar shakes. That's technically not allowed. There's no chance in an ember storm, in a wildland fire, that a dry cedar shake is not going to ignite. You can guarantee it. If you look at the building code's actually designed with specifications. So this is Chapter 15 of the 2018 International Building Code. And what you see here is Class A, B, C. And that's defined via ASTM E108. If I look back at these graphs, let me just show you what an ASTM E108 test is like so you can get a feel for it. This is the specifications for Class A roof. You basically design your test apparatus at an angle. You put 12 miles per hour wind on that. You're not allowed to spread fire on the roofing material more than 6 feet in 10 minutes. And you also can't have any burn through. Class B roofs, you can go farther. Class C roofs, you can go farther, that kind of thing. So that's how the classification goes for Class A, B, C. And that's what's allowed for construction. Now, this is the International Building Code, but it mimics the IRC. Honestly, the California Building Code, the Oregon Building Code, the Washington Building Code, they're all going to be knockoffs of the IRC for residences or the IBC for non-residential structures. So basically the fundamentals are the same. Another thing to keep in mind is, sure, you might start off with like a Class B roof on a structure, but there is a finite limit to the duration of that roof material. You have to consider replacing your material, not just when it leaks, but when it's deteriorated to the point that it no longer provides fire protection capacity. And, you know, the chipping, the bubbling, telltale signs that you absolutely have to address your roof structure's problems. A couple things also to consider are, for instance, if you look here on the gutters, the necessity to clean gutters in a wildland fire area. If you fail to clean your gutters and allow gutters to build up with dry leaves or dry pine needles, what ends up happening is that's a bed for ignition. Those embers will land at those locations and it will act as a fuse. And the fuse, basically, the gutter will be a fuse. Inevitably, you'll find a weak point in your gutter location within your structure. It'll burn into your structure and take your house out. So cleaning gutters is an important principle, not just for allowing the water to dissipate cleanly, but also to avoid serious wildland fire complications. I mentioned a couple days ago in that other video I did, the bug out location, how to fire harden your bug out location. And that was, I believe, 4 days ago, and it was just prior to the LA fires. But the necessity to fill the gaps at the ends of your eaves. I use the example of corrugated metal, leaving little gaps. Here's some basically some masonry style roofing structure, terracotta type stuff. But you need to fill these holes so nothing can blow in. It's called bird stopping. Another necessity is to ensure that your soffits, your eaves, are all closed off. You don't want to leave holes in there. If you do have holes, like vented soffits such as shown here, you need to keep the meshes down tight so you're not going to have anything blowing in. Here's another thing that's not really a good thing to do. See how the angle comes down on this eave? It actually concentrates that hot air. So when you do your eaves for your soffits, if you come over 90 degrees to hit your structure, it's going to do, it's going to allow less heat accumulation under those eaves. It's not going to be a heat trap for you. The necessity of skirting your decks, underneath mobile homes, even parked trailers, it's an absolute necessity. Two things will happen. One, in a windy condition, you're going to have debris blowing in, and it's going to accumulate. So you'll have dry leaves, you'll have dry needles, you'll have dry tumbleweeds, and unless that's properly cleaned, what will happen during an ember storm is a firebrand will land in that location. It will ignite underneath a combustible structure, you will take out your building. It's gone. There's no way to last. Here's a nice example of a structure at the peak of a slope. You can see the ravine sloped up, worse condition, but we all like that nice view. But you can see what they did here. They have a 5-foot buffer that prevents fires from igniting around a structure. And the International Wildland-Urban Interface Code, that specs it out. That's something that's mandated by that code, as well as the California Building Code, Chapter 7A. Take a look at this. I think this is kind of worthwhile to see. And what it does is there's a zone within 5 feet of your structure. What you don't want to have is any kind of combustibles. You'll see bark mulch. You'll see creeping spruce within this 5-foot zone adjacent to a combustible structure. Both are taboos. You want to stay away from any of those things. Rocks are ideal if you use like a gravel type landscape that's non-combustible. Some other options might be succulents, something that holds or retains a lot of water, that is not going to ignite, it's not going to dry out, or well-watered grass. Using bark mulch, bark dust, really not a good idea. You really shouldn't do it. The next zone is really out here from 5 to 30 feet. Well-maintained area. If you want landscaping, have it in islands. You don't want juniper trees. You probably don't want spruce trees in that zone. Junipers, when they're hot, when you have desert conditions or drought conditions, I'd even say Portland, Oregon's a desert in August. I mean, it's very dry. You have those kind of situations. What's going to happen is that juniper is going to go up fast. It's going to ignite adjacent combustibles. So basically, keep that 30-foot zone clear of bunches of trees or the type of trees that would ignite. And then out to 100 feet, have it well manicured or at least controlled. I mean, clearly not, you're not going for a Beverly Hills type landscape, but have like if you have pine trees, fir trees, trim them down, the low-hanging branches. You don't want low-hanging branches in that zone. That's going to act as ladder fuel. It's going to take out the canopy of that tree, and the radiant energy from that tree canopy fire, it's going to spread to your exposed buildings. It's going to take those out. So that's basically the gist of it. It's pretty simple. Could go through the code. Here's, I'm going to jump into 1144. I think there's some value in taking a look at it really quick. So this is NFP 1144, I think the 2015 version. I've mentioned in another video, this is morphed into 1140, so it's a little outdated. But you can see the same principle here, 5 feet around your structure. It doesn't show it clearly in this, but you have a radius of 30 feet around your structure. And then out to 100 feet, keep the low-level branches trimmed. If you jump over, you can see how they landscape with rocks adjacent to their construction. That way, I don't personally like this example. It's not 4.0, but it works. It's what's recommended. Have some really wet, crops here. I think they have some bark mulch here. I personally wouldn't want that within 5 feet of a structure, but that's just what they're doing here. But definitely the gravel's ideal. Here's another example. It shows bark mulch. Once again, would not do that unless you have a thoroughly watered. But keep in mind, when you're in a conflagration, when you have a wildland fire attacking a subdivision, for instance, you've lost all your water. Everybody has their water on. Like I mentioned before, if you're served by like 1,000 or 2,000 GPM, it's gone. Your water's gone. So that bark mulch or bark dust, your combustible vegetation within 5 feet of your structure, it's going to dry out in those conditions very fast. Basically 1 hour fuels for the kind of shrubbery you have, and the bark mulch will dry out in a few hours. It'll be dried, it'll ignite, take out your building. So just avoid it, be smart. A couple other things I kind of like here. The absolute necessity to skirt decks. In this example from 1144, what he's identifying here is there's pine needles underneath this deck. Absolutely taboo. You get an ember landing there, I guarantee it's going to ignite. It's going to ignite this deck, and the deck's going to ignite your structure. So you definitely don't want to do that. Look how they put island landscaping at this nice California home. It looks good. It's fire safe. Similarly here, more in the alpine setting. I think I would still want some non-combustible landscaping around the structure to make it a little bit more fire safe. But it's spread out. It's not dense, and it makes it a lot safer. Take a look at this drawing as well. This is a real important thing here. Fences are fuses. If you have like a nice cedar fence, it's going to ignite pretty quick. And what will happen is the fire, it will actually follow your fence line. So what you need to do is break up that fence line before it gets to your structure. Have some non-combustible fencing within 5 feet of your structure, such as here you've transitioned from the wood to steel. And that's going to keep the fence from igniting your siding and thus igniting your home. So these are just some basic tools you can follow. I kind of like this as well. You can see how it's sloped up. You notice how they have the parapet wall as fence around their structure. That fence is going to actually keep the fire from spreading into the yard. It's just another helpful utility. Point is, there's some good ideas. If people would have incorporated these very simple and very inexpensive principles in Los Angeles, you wouldn't have lost the structures that ended up going up. It's not hard to do. It's pretty smart to do. And I think you could do it and make it look good. I appreciate your time. Thanks for watching this. Post some questions if you have some. This is something I know a little bit about, and I'm more than happy to lend a hand if you need some direction. Thank you and have a good day.